Lately, more and more cruisers, not just first timers, but loyal, experienced cruise guests are actively avoiding inside cabins. And they're not just avoiding, they're also warning others about them. If you search inside cruise cabins on YouTube, you'll find hundreds of videos telling you why they're the smart choice. They're cheap, they're dark, and for years, they have been considered the go-to option for budget cruising. But that is changing, and it's changing fast. I've spent years working and living on cruise ships. I've watched this shift happen in real time. The inside cabin, once seen as a hack, has started to feel more like a gamble. So in this video, I'm going to walk through exactly why that is. Even if it means spending a little bit more, even if you booked them in the past, and even if you used to swear by them. Because the truth is, the cruise industry, it's changed. And what used to make inside cabins a great choice might actually make them one of the worst choices on your entire cruise. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a time when choosing an inside cabin felt like unlocking a secret level of the cruise. You'd pay a fraction of the price, avoid the crowds, and still enjoy the same food, shows, and itinerary as everybody else. But now, that price gap, it's shrinking, and it's shrinking fast. Cruise lines have gotten smarter. They've realised most people don't want to spend their vacation in a windowless box, so they're charging just enough for balconies to make you second guess the deal on an inside cabin. I've seen sailings where the difference between an inside and an ocean view cabin is less than $100 per person for the entire week. Sometimes the jump to a balcony is barely more than what you'd spend on specialty dining package. And that forces the question, why am I saving money if I'm sacrificing comfort the entire time? Now, this hits the hardest on longer cruises, because when you're doing 10 nights in an inside cabin, the lack of space, and it's also the lack of light. That hack has quickly become a hassle, and more cruisers are slowly starting to realise that by the time they add in drink packages, excursions, and onboard extras, they've already spent hundreds, so why not go all in on a cabin too? But it's not just about the money anymore, it's about the value, and inside cabins, for many people, just don't feel worth it now. And once cruisers realise they're not saving as much as they thought they would, something else starts to matter a lot more. Not the price, because what seems like a smart trade-off on paper can start to feel claustrophobic quite quickly. Inside cabins are pitch black, and for the first night or two, that is great, don't get me wrong. When I first get onto a new ship, I love it. I sleep like a baby. But after a few days, it stops feeling relaxing and starts to feel a little bit disorientating. There's no sunrise to wake you up naturally. And for me, living on board as a crew member for months at a time, that sunlight is a big deal. I've literally no sense of whether it's 6 a.m. or 3 p.m. I suppose I'm completely reliant on the artificial light. And for some people, and for me, completely throws off my body clock. And this is especially going to affect you on those longer cruises. However, if you're only taking short cruises, that is fine. And let's be honest, a lot of people are just going to stumble back to the room on those types of cruises. So it doesn't really matter what type of cabin you're staying in anyway. But for longer cruises, that natural light is a game changer. I've had guests tell me they've overslept, they've missed excursions, and others have woken up at 3 in the morning like me thinking it's time for breakfast, just because they'd lost all sense of time. I suppose your internal rhythm just gets disrupted, and that can actually affect your mood and energy on your entire holiday. So if you're someone who already struggles with sleep, an inside cabin can amplify that in ways that you just wouldn't expect. Even people who thought they didn't care about the view now say it just feels off waking up every day in total darkness. This isn't just about the luxury though, it's about the mental reset. Because cruising should feel like a break from real life, and I suppose not a windowless bunker that you're trying to escape from. Now, here's where things get, I suppose, really interesting, because one of the biggest reasons people are now avoiding inside cabins today actually has nothing to do with what's inside the room. It's about what's around it. But to understand why that's becoming such a big deal breaker, we first need to look at how cruise lines actually decide where to put these cabins and what that means for you. Interior cabins are often used to fill the, I suppose, least desirable real estate on the ship. That means you're more likely to end up near noisy venues, under the gym, above the theatre. Some are right beside crew access doors. Others are across some storage closets that slam open and shut every morning at 6 a.m. Now, trust me on this one, I know one of the biggest complaints that we get on board are noise complaints, and especially if you're near elevators. Every ship that I've ever worked on, when there is a guest elevator, there is a crew elevator that backs onto that one. And the crew elevators are used 24/7. But bear with me, it does get worse. You usually don't find out about that until you're already on board. Cruise lines don't advertise next to the crew elevator when you book. And I'll tell you how to avoid booking these cabins in just a second, because I've seen people switch rooms mid-cruise because they were just placed near the theatre or trapped near the gym. Now, these cabins might be cheap, but if they put you in the middle of the ship's chaos, you're going to spend your whole cruise paying for it in other ways. So always double check deck plans when you're booking your cabin and see if you're near any elevators. And I suppose don't just take into account the guest noise, but also the noise that the crew could be making too. I do apologise about that. For me, I would use CruiseNapper for this because they actually have the most deck plans that I've found on any ship. But if you've got any websites that think would help, drop them below. Now, this next point is the one that most cruisers, I suppose, don't find out about until it's too late. And for many, it's the exact moment they decide to never book an inside cabin again. Because everything I've talked about so far all builds up to this. I've seen this one crucial detail get overlooked, and it can completely derail your cruise before it even starts. When you book an inside cabin, especially a guarantee fare, you're often at the top of the cruise line's list for upgrades. It sounds amazing, and it is. Well, that's just on the surface. There's a little bit more to it. Now, here's the catch. An upgrade doesn't always mean better. It just means, I would say, it means different. I've seen guests move from a quiet midship inside cabin to a better ocean view cabin directly above a nightclub, or into a forward-facing cabin that looks great in photos but comes with extreme movement, and when you open your balcony door, you've got howling winds. Now, cruise lines aren't trying to ruin your holiday. They're trying to free up certain categories for new bookings, but that reshuffling often hits inside cruisers the hardest because they're the most flexible to move. And also, the least likely to complain if you've paid a bit less. So even if you've done the research, you've chosen the perfect location, and you've booked early, you're probably still the most vulnerable to ending up in a cabin that you've never picked. And that now makes a lot of cruisers think twice about ever booking inside cabins again. Now, you might be paying less, but you're going to be hearing a lot more. Now, here's something that I suppose most cruise lines won't mention, but inside cabins also have some of the poorest air circulation on the ship. Obvious reasons, they're sealed, there's no windows, no balcony, there's just no fresh airflow, just a centralised ventilation system. And when you start spending a few hours in there, especially on those longer cruises, sleeping, showering, hanging clothes to dry even, that air just starts to feel a little bit heavy. So if you're prone to allergies, claustrophobia, or even just a little bit of seasickness, that stale air is just going to make everything that little bit worse. And even if you can tolerate the lack of space and light and the noise yourself, here's where things get even trickier. Because inside cabins aren't just going to affect your experience, they can actually impact the people that you're cruising with too, which is quite a dampener. On paper, most inside cabins say they sleep up to 4 people, which is true, but what they don't tell you is that actually it looks like barely a foot of floor space and a bathroom that feels smaller than a cruise ship elevator. There's always a struggle to unpack, there's nowhere to hang, wet swimming suits, and no real way to decompress after a long day in port. Inside cabins are often sold as affordable for everyone, but some guests say it's rarely comfortable for more than 2. And when you're travelling with others, that lack of breathing room becomes, I suppose, daily stress that you just didn't plan for on your holiday. So for many repeat cruisers, that's the tipping point. It's not just the cabin, it's the experience that you're going to have on board. Now for me, when I cruised, I suppose there's just something about opening the curtains in the morning and seeing the sea, still and quiet. Now my family loves standing on the balcony with a coffee while the ship either pulls in or pulls away from a port. And they're the moments that my family remember. They did start cruising inside cabins, but now they only book balcony cabins because of this. And the inside cabins just cut you off from all those experiences. So instead of watching sailways from your own private space, you're trying to find a spot on a crowded top deck. And over the course of a week or longer, you start to feel a little bit disconnected. you become a guest in a floating hotel and not part of the cruising experience. So for many cruisers, that's what's changing their mind to finally upgrade. So while inside cabins might work for some, more cruisers than ever are just deciding they're just not worth the trade-offs. And if you're craving space, scenery, and a slower and suppose more scenic way to travel, river cruising might actually be the upgrade you didn't know you were ready for. And I'll show you exactly what that's like in this video right here.